About to get rolling. All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Talking Trout. I'm Mike Coor, your host with Wisconsin Trout Unlimited. It is the first Wednesday of the month, and we are back. We got a pretty exciting guest tonight. We've got Chip Long, who's a fisheries biologist for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and he covers the northeast part of the state, in particular Marinette County, and he touches a little bit in Oconto County too. And I know, like, if you kind of glanced at a map of Wisconsin, like the trout waters, you kind of see this there's kind of a line, like you can trace it from the southwest through the northeast. There's just like concentrations of trout water there. So Chip's got a lot of it in his area, and it's one of the parts of the state that we don't necessarily talk about all that much. The driftlets gets a lot of attention. The Central Sand certainly gets attention. Obviously, the Great Lakes tributaries and some of those waters in the northwest part of the state. But tonight we're gonna dedicate an hour to the trout waters of the northeast part of the state, and I'm gonna turn it over to Chip, and we'll hear what he's got going on, what the department's been working on as far as habitat and restoration projects and everything else in the northeast. So, Chip, the floor is yours.
Well, Mike, I sure do appreciate the generous introduction. I hope you didn't oversell this tonight. But Mike kind of called me on short notice, I think about 2 weeks ago, and said, "Hey, would you be willing to present on March 6th?" And I said, "Sure." So here we are. I'm just getting my slideshow. There it is. So, I don't know if Mike tuned into this particular series that the DNR has been sponsoring here. It's been what we call our Spotlight series. Where we've been highlighting different, projects and resources around Northeast Wisconsin. So on short notice, I told Mike I would give an abbreviated version of the presentation I gave on February 19th. So it's not going to be the same presentation. I'm going to gloss over a few things tonight, and others I'll probably spend a little bit more time on. But if you've got questions, and maybe there's questions about things that I didn't cover tonight, those are, perfectly fair game as well. But, part of this series was for our public, or, the attendees, to get to know us a little bit. So I have just a little bit of introduction about myself. I grew up in northern Indiana, a little town called Lakeville. So, needless to say, I grew up with the opportunity. I actually lived in a house right here on Linden Road. I got to walk across and fish in Little Fights Lake here. There was a conservation club down here where I could ride my bike. Matter of fact, we rented a house here for a good many years, and I could just cut through and fish at my leisure. I had a friend that lived back here and another one over here. And when I lived here, I could walk through the woods, or the bait shop was up here. It was just a great place to grow up in the, late 70s, early 80s. And as a teenager, just down this Highway 4 here, about 4 miles away, was a state park. So when I was of driving and working age, I started working out there, and it's kind of my introduction really into what resource management is here. But yeah, this is kind of a different view of just a little town I grew up in. Not very big, 600-700 people. But as a small kid or a small town in the Midwest, great segue into why a guy became a fish biologist with all the fishing I got to do just without very far from home. So good stuff. So, I worked for the Indiana Department of Natural Resources for a lot of summers, even through college. I got my bachelor's in biology from Manchester College. It's a small college over in Northeast Indiana. And, like most 20-somethings, I avoided real responsibility as long as I could. And then I went back to grad school in 99 down in Arkansas, where I kind of laid the foundation for their community urban fishing program. From there, I moved out east and worked for the state of Virginia for a few years. And then I had the chance to come back to Indiana, and I worked in central Indiana, and then actually wound up for the last few years I was there actually working in the same place I grew up. So I got to do a lot of the survey work, again, on the lakes that I grew up fishing. Was pretty neat. And then saw an opportunity in Wisconsin, and it just, I knew a lot about the agency and what it had to offer me as a fisheries professional. So I made the leap in 2010. So I've been up here for just about 14 years now. So And so for those of you who don't know, this is kind of how we're organized as a fisheries bureau. So I'm up here in Northeast, and this is my area, Marinette in northern Oconto County, north of 64. But there's about 45 fish biologists. We have, teams on Lake Superior, northern Lake Michigan, southern Lake Michigan, and also over on the Mississippi River. So all these white boxes here are actually, fish biologists that do the same thing that I do. And again, up here in northeast Wisconsin, it's a pretty unique area to work. Not only do I serve on a fish team that has a lot of responsibilities with Green Bay, but I also manage the flowages on the Menominee River, or 6 of the 10. The shaded portion is the ceded territory, so I have some responsibilities to the treaty unit. So again, very interesting place to work. There's always a lot going on. So that's kind of how we're structured. And, a lot of times when I'm talking to lake groups, I have to put their particular lake or specific resource in the context of what we do and how we do it. So, a lot of people want to know, well, you haven't surveyed our lake for, so long. Why is that? Well, our larger lakes serve more people. So those are on like a 6-year rotation. Our smaller lakes are on more of an 8-year rotation. Those are between 100 and 1,000 acres. And then our small lakes are just lakes that we do as time permits, or there might be some management issue. And that's just the lakes. So between Marinette and Oconto County, you're talking 820 lakes or 25,000 acres of water. But we haven't even touched trout streams. And, we're able to do about 30 to 50 sites a year, depending on the year. And that, between Marinette and Oconto County, we're talking that's almost 1,000 miles of classified water. But really what's guiding our work and our management of these resources is our, inland trout management plan. And this plan was started in, 2017 and finalized by, late 2009 or 2019. And, this is really what guides our management. So, I think if you really want to understand trout management in Wisconsin, this is a pretty important thing to visit. But also, when you buy a trout stamp, this is where that money goes. And this report just came out, gosh, I want to say about 6 weeks ago. So essentially what it does is it highlights, the expenditures for that biennium, which is important. And this is just a diagram too of, I'm just trying to reduce, there we go. This is just a diagram of our trout stamp sales. And a lot of this was when the conservation patron licenses, your trout stamp was included. That's why we saw the big jump in stamp sales. But then it was kind of interesting too, and it shouldn't be surprising that during COVID, we sold a lot more trout stamps. So again, I think this is an important document if you really want a good understanding of how that trout stamp funds are spent. And then again, for just the angler, I really like this trout tool, Trout Regulations and Opportunities User Tool. It's an interactive GIS tool. So if you're new to an area or you're going to visit an area and you want to learn a little bit more about the streams before you get there, I encourage you to utilize this tool. So, when you're talking to fisheries managers, you're going to hear the word toolbox a lot. And really what that is, for the various species that we manage, depending on our management objectives for that species, whether we're trying to manage for a consumption opportunity or a quality opportunity or a memorable or trophy, we have different regulation options for those. But when you think about just fisheries management as a whole, it's where we have fishing regulations, which is one way that we can manage fish populations, obviously stocking, and habitat. Now, these were 3 things during my Spotlight series that I spent a lot of time on individually, and I'm really going to gloss over these tonight because I want to talk about a couple specific projects that I've worked on. And I will touch on a few things, but I'm not going to go into as much detail tonight. But I think when you do think about fish management, it's a multi-pronged approach to managing this particular type of resource. So again, when we talk about, trout streams in Wisconsin, we have over 13,000 miles, which about 40% of which are classified as class 1. And I'm not going to go through the classifications I did the other night, but class 1, self-sustaining, provide ample, opportunity, abundance is high enough, and they're using all the available habitat. In Marinette County, about 70% of our streams are class 1. And again, more miles of classified trout stream in Marinette County. And this map is old. The trout stream mileage has actually been recalculated, and it's over 700 miles. And about 20% of my streams are class 2, and only about 10% are actually classified as class 3. So again, a lot of water here. Pretty much if you're going over a stream in Marinette County, chances are it is a trout stream. We've had a lot of changes in regulations. When I first started here, people kind of joked that, if you wanted to trout fish, regulations were overly complicated. And while I could empathize in some respects, I didn't really, it took me a while to learn the area, but it just didn't hold a lot of water with me. But we collected a lot of feedback over time. And from between 2015 and 2016, we went from a 4 category to a 3 category system. So this is what it looked like in 2015. In 2016, we kind of went to a county base. We reduced the number of special regulations, extended the season. So there was a lot of change there. By 2024, I had opened up a couple of my streams. I went from a county base of 3 fish daily bag and an 8-inch minimum to a 0, no minimum length limit, and a 5 fish daily bag. And these were primarily streams that we were stocking with fish. And even by 2026, you're going to see more changes. So my county base is going to go to no minimum and a 5 bag. And I think that's partially because, well, I've spent a lot more time in the field and realized just how resilient these populations are. And I don't think, the nail in the coffin isn't going to be angler harvest on a lot of these streams. I wanted to take a more conservative approach between 2015 and 2016 and manage these individually instead of a one size fits all. But the more I've got out there and really surveyed these streams, I realized that we can be a little bit less conservative and go with a more liberal, 0 min and 5 bag. And it does fit because that's pretty much, we're kind of the only portion of the state that adopted that 3 fish daily bag. So that's going to be some changes that you'll see in the next couple of years. Stocking, we had a lot of changes in guidance. We're continually evaluating the products that we put out there. We had a big change in guidance between 2016 and 2017. So this is about how many annual inland trout stocking quotas I had was 36, which was about 49,000 fish. So by 2017, with the new guidance, I reduced quotas by about 40% and a 30% reduction in the fish that I requested. And we've got some new guidance that's coming out. Well, it has come out. It just was finalized. So we're going to be, implementing that. I mean, between 2017 and 2023, we've really been evaluating, the use of our stock locations. And we've done this a variety of ways, whether we're out for opening weekend and the following weekend in person interviewing anglers or counting cars. We've got these self-reporting kiosks that we move around to gather feedback and, fishing effort and harvest information. We've also utilized, cameras. People come in, people go out. I know how long they've been there. A lot of times you can actually see the fish in their creel. So we've, implemented several different techniques to monitor and evaluate use. But our updated guidance for 2024 is really not just for trout, but for all fish species that we stock, whether it be walleye, muskie. We're going to this genetic management unit model, which with the goal is just to ensure the protection of our self-sustaining or natural populations. Because when you mix stocks of fish, so for example, if we're stocking, say Croy Brook trout in our streams, which we have, I think we're just trying to be more cognizant of that because, when you get wild stocks and domestic stocks that interbreed, it does reduce their overall fitness, right? Because you have these stocks of fish that have evolved to this particular environment and this habitat. So in essence, they will do better. So our new guidance and some of the stipulations that we are going to have, especially as it pertains to brook trout, I have to assess, brook trout and connected streams. We all know that fish move beyond the stocking locations into connected streams. So we have to be a little bit more cognizant of that. And then we assign some specific metrics. So, you're not going to stock brown trout in a stream if brook trout abundance is greater than, half of our sample. And we're not going to stock domestic brook trout in any of our streams if we have adequate reproduction. And that was defined as, more than 250 young of the year per mile. So we'll see some changes in stocking locations in the coming, biennium, which was really a good segue into a project that I started back in 2013. to evaluate really, what is the contribution of the stocking in the South Branch of the Pemmican. The South Branch of the Pemmican is a stream in northern Marinette County. And it's kind of counterintuitive that the headwaters is actually class 2, but the tailwater, the lower stretch, is actually class 1. So it's about a 30-mile stream, again, up in northern Marinette County. So, my first question was, what's the contribution of stocking? So, but I was also asking myself this 10 years ago, if by definition this is a class 1 stream, then why are we stocking it? Right. And it's a little more complicated. I mean, but I'm just going to go through this project in a little bit more detail. So in 2013, 2015, and 2017, my technician and I would make a trip over to St. Croix Falls, to our hatchery there, and we would fin clip all these small fingerlings, about 12,000 of them. And it would take the better part of a day, 4 or 5 of us, to clip the adipose fin off of them, one at a time. And then what we did is we worked with a co-op up in Niagara, and they raised the fish for the year. And the following May, we come and we stock them out. And we stock those fish at these 6 locations indicating in red, and then we sampled these other 12 locations throughout the stream. But we did this in 2014, 2016, and 2018. So this is kind of what we saw. It was about 1 in 4 fish that we collected during our sampling season were actually marked fish. And what was kind of surprising to us, well, sort of, but most of it was class 1. We saw a lot of young of the year and a lot of age 1 fish, but we even saw fish that were not clipped, that were in those larger size categories. And now keep in mind, though, this is all 3 years combined. And this was just the data from our stock sites. Well, at our non-stock sites, we kind of saw the same thing. And obviously, some of the sites that we sampled were relatively close to stock sites, but we still saw some movement between stocked and non-stock sites. But we were still seeing, fish over 10 inches that weren't necessarily stocked fish. And this is all the data combined, stocked versus non-stocked sites. So when we just put all the data together, so out of 15,000 stocked fish in that time frame, we only collected about 400. So the question remains, was harvest that great? Did these fish leave the system? Very difficult to tell, but regardless, the data suggests that there's still a lot of wild fish here. And so it begs to reason, well, why are we stocking fish here? Because the system looks very healthy, right? Well, in the middle of the project, our stocking guidance changed. So we thought, well, let's change the scope of our study to what would happen if we stopped stocking fish? What would be the response of the wild population? And so we decided that we wouldn't stock fish from 2019 to 2024, and we would resurvey those sites in 2021 and again in 2024. And, just to take a break and kind of move back, I looked through a lot of literature, and, this was really a big issue back in the 70s out west, where they were stocking trout in streams, and they proposed this same sort of strategy. Well, people were up in arms. Well, look what happened. They stopped stocking fish, and the wild populations flourished, and now they have some of the best trout fisheries in the nation. And it's kind of ironic. So we were really anxious to see what would happen. Well, here is our data from 2021. And you can see, with no stocking in 3 years, and we collected more fish than we did in any given year prior. And if you even look at the top end, we caught a lot of fish, and we had more fish in almost every inch category, except for some of these mid-range size fish, than we did in all previous years. So I think the response has been positive, but I don't want just one data point, right? So we're going to go back out there in 2024 and see what it looks like before we, move forward with a final report. But I think it's pretty exciting to see that even in the absence of stocking, that numbers are still pretty good here. So this is where I kind of transitioned in my talk the other night. I spent a little bit of time talking about beaver management and obviously why we do that specifically on trout streams. I talked about some in-stream modifications or some projects that and whatnot that had been taking place within my management area. And we have an operations section, and within that section we have habitat specialists, and so we have one that works in my area and one that works south down around Oconto County, And, they do what we call now a lot of stream bank fishability brushing. If you've fished any streams in northeast Wisconsin, it's not the driftless area. These are small first order headwater streams, a lot of them, and a lot of tag alder. So what we've tried to do is get in, and we're brushing anywhere between 10 and 20 miles a year at various locations to, again, increase their fishability and essentially not necessarily improve access. Access is, that word, there's a lot of semantics associated with it. But what we are trying to do is cut that back to make fishing a little bit easier, and especially on some of the areas where we've invested in in-stream habitat. So that's something that's ongoing, and we're continually expanding that. But you have to go back with the nature of tag alder. You cut it now, in 3-4 years, it grows back pretty quick. And I think the other thing that we spent a lot of time and effort on, and I did talk a little bit more detail, and I'm going to highlight a project tonight, was about connectivity. We hear, it's road stream crossings up here are a huge detriment to, the ability of fish to migrate, to headwaters, to spawn. They are a big problem. And I had the opportunity to initiate a project, and I really want to take some time now to take you through that project. A lot of nice pictures, so I'm going to jump right in. So this is a crossing on the north branch of the Beaver Creek, and this is a fishery in central Marinette County. We own almost 1,100 acres here, and we are the riparian owner on both sides of the stream here. So I thought, if we're going to walk the walk, we need to talk the talk. I really had to convince my supervisor at the time that, I think this is worth pursuing. I just really kind of want to walk you through how this project came to be from start to finish. So these were all the partners that we worked with, and obviously we got a lot of grants to do this, or the town of Beaver did. And so, part of the disclaimer for that project is that I get to mention, our Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, obviously Trout Unlimited, worked with Chris Collier and Laura McFarland before she came over to the DNR. And so a lot of good partnership here to complete this project. So this is the crossing on the north branch of the Beaver Creek, 25th Road. It's the last crossing in the watershed. In 2010, we had replaced the crossing just downstream. This was what it was. This was an old logging era dam. This was a little bit of a perch culvert, probably more of a velocity barrier, and it created a huge plunge pool here. It's probably 6 or 7 feet deep. So much, in fact, that there's a handicap platform that was constructed by our local Trout Unlimited chapter for folks to take advantage of that plunge pool. Well, when we put this bottomless culvert in, a lot of sediment and whatnot had been backed up from this old logging era dam, and in one rain event, that plunge pool filled in. Obviously, I don't know that we communicated the project very well. This was actually ongoing the first week I started. I got to come out that first week and watch them place this, and pretty neat thing to participate in your first week on a new job. But there was a lot of people after the fact that thought we really ruined the stream by doing this, primarily because they couldn't pull up and just catch a fish right off the shoulder. But obviously for connectivity's sake, it was a good project. So that's kind of what was part of the justification for the upstream one. It's like, well, hey, we just 10 years ago replaced the one downstream. We should do the last one on this stream. And just below the 25th Road site, we have, a habitat site, and it's a site we sample every year. So I was very familiar. We have 10 bank covers down through there. We renovated those in 2010. It's on my list of things to do in the next biennium. So again, a very popular spot, and a very important spot to maintain the integrity of our habitat structures as well. So this was the real problem. That crossing just wasn't capable of moving water, during a rain event, and the town would regularly have to come out and close the road. So this is the same picture. I just walked forward and took a picture. So the crossing is way down here, but it just can't pull that discharge. So the water is bypassing the stream and coming through the woods and wherever it can find, a spot to get downstream. And part of the other problem was, this is the upstream side of that same crossing. This was a regular occurrence. If you've got debris blocking the culverts, water just can't pass. So that was a maintenance issue as well. And I think the town, one of their concerns is that this was relatively narrow. When you had cars coming in opposite directions, it was pretty tight. It was only about 20 feet across there. Someone would generally yield in either direction to get over this crossing. So, Chris Collier came out and did a stream profile. He was with Trout Unlimited. And this is kind of what the stream looked like if you were looking from the top down. So here's your Thoweg. So a majority of the current was primarily going through this one culvert. And the town's proposal for $40,000 was to come in here and to put in a fifth culvert. And I just said, I'm just not confident that is going to solve your problem. So you can see too, these other three culverts are more than almost 50% embedded with sediment. So they're just not capable of passing the water anyway. So this is obviously just a big problem. Additionally, this is a wetland map. So again, if here's the stream, this road is essentially acts like a dam, and it forces all this water. And if you've ever been out to this part of the county, it's a lot of hayfields, some tillable ground too, but these are big hills out here. And so when it rains, it comes down, and I mean, this water runs off fast, and it all has to come down through this point. So it wasn't just about keeping the stream connected. It was also about connecting the floodplain, right? So that was a big, objective of this project as well. But I think really when you look at the land area above this point that is trying to drain down, it was, we knew this crossing was problematic. So again, when I got the permit to review, I called the town and said, hey, can I come out there and talk to you about your proposal? And they said, yep. So they invited me to go out there. So, I really wanted to highlight really what the fishery is, what the fishery area is, why it was established, and the quality of the resource that this town is lucky enough to have in their backyard. So I'm going to take the time now to highlight a little bit of that data as well for you guys. So these are the three sites that we sample, and you might hear the word trend site. These are sites that we sample every other year. And so I've sampled this site every other year since 2011. Actually, I've sampled all three of these sites. So it comes out to about 1.25 miles of stream, and the stream itself is only 11 miles. So we're sampling about 10% of the stream every other year. So we got a really good data set. So I just put a few years of data together. I don't want to put 10 years worth of data. It's just a busy graph if I do, but just to give you an idea of what we've seen over the last 5 years out there in terms of brook trout numbers, they were down. And a couple of those years, we did have some high water years. I mean, if conditions aren't ideal for sampling, we do pack up and we pick another day. And we're lucky this is relatively close to our office compared to, if we had to run from Pesh to go to Pembine, that's an hour. We'd probably make a better judgment call. But this one's a little closer, so we do pick, good sampling days, and we generally do them the same week of July every year that they're up in our schedule. But take-home message here: a lot of fish over that 8-inch minimum are a fair number. And some pretty good size structure. And, we haven't stocked any fish in the stream since the early 1990s. So all these populations are self-sustaining. I think if you look at the data another way, I like to look at our total catch rate, through time. What's the trend? And then I like to look at the catch rate of brook trout over 8 inches. And we have seen a pretty steady decline. But I think, if you would look at total catch rate from 2009 through 2023, you'd like, that's okay. But a couple years ago, I was even more worried than I am now because we've had a couple good years. So you do see these natural fluctuations, not only in abundance, but sometimes in size structure as those good year classes, grow through the population. So again, a couple years ago was really concerned, a little less concerned now, I guess, if it continues to go up, that's great. But I think at some time, all things that go up must come down too. So we're kind of anxious to get out there in 25 to see. That's just for brook trout. Oh, and this is just a table. And this is a table that would be in my report. And what you're going to see here are these percentiles. And percentile, kind of think of if you had 100 sample points, and for brook trout over 10 inches, if you're at the 75th percentile, and I compare this to all stream sites in the northern lakes and forest ecoregion. So that's this green region. it would be in the 75th percentile. So you can say, hey, if you're in the North Branch of the Beaver Creek, in 2023, you're going to have about 4 brook trout per mile over 10 inches. And that's at the 75th percentile. So overall for brook trout, it's about an average stream. It does have some nicer sized fish, but for the most part, in a brook trout fishery, it's average. But when we look at brown trout, it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, the numbers are great. The size structure is great. We do manage this with a 12-inch minimum, and there are big fish out there. And if I went back a couple years, this length frequency would go up to about 24 inches. We do see those fish. They're a little bit harder to net with our little tennis racket sized nets sometimes, but we do see some bigger fish. But again, fish between 15 and 20 are not uncommon. I could go back to that slide. There was a picture of a gentleman on the right. I think that was just from 2 years ago. He called me, wanted to know where he could catch a nice brown. I told him, and 2 days later, he sent me that picture from the beavers. So pretty cool. But last couple of years, you can see we've caught just good numbers of brown trout. And same thing. So here are our trends. Our catch rate has been very consistent of fish that are 12 inches and larger. Our total catch rate has continued to increase. But again, if you looked at that a couple of years ago, we were on a downhill slope. So, but what's kind of interesting here is usually when you see one species doing well, you kind of see the others not doing as well. Whereas the last 2 years, not only have brook trout done better, brown trout have done better. So I'm kind of puzzled there. Why are we seeing good increases in both? Is it water? Is it habitat? I mean, what are we doing right? Are we doing anything? I mean, what's the mechanism for the increase in abundance for both of those species of fish within that 4-year period? And I don't know that I understand, but maybe as the data set continues to grow, that'll provide more clarity. But again, when you look at brown trout, same table for brown trout. Again, these are compared to the northern lakes and forest ecoregion. When you look at all size groups of brown trout in the North Branch of the Beaver, I mean, you're talking 60 fish per mile over 12 inches. And hands down, this is probably the best brown trout fishery that I manage in Marinette County. So it's, again, it's a really nice stream, and I'm going to highlight some more on this as we go through. But, this was my pitch to the town on why this project was so important. And I said, hey, if you're willing to wait a year, I'll see if I can find some money. So their budget was 40 grand. Green Bay Trout Unlimited always has a little pot of money specifically for road stream crossing projects. I had a little bit of money available, which was mostly for some materials. So for this winter of 2018 and 2019, I did all the grant work. So essentially, I would do the grant applications and take them over to the town. The clerk would sign them, and they were essentially the custodian of the funds while I kind of managed the project, and then performed or completed all the deliverables on the grants for the town. And once those were done, then the town would sign them and we would submit. So that's kind of how we were able to make the project work. But all in all, we were able to get them $169,000 to put towards this project. So what we were able to do is use their $40,000, and I got this $60,000 from our Office of Great Waters. This is a federal grant, so we were able to leverage a couple of state grants with this money. That's kind of how it was able to work. So we got all the money by December of 2019. So they did have to delay their project a year, which they were willing to do. So then I was like, well, now that we've got the money, what sort of structure are we going to put in? And we kind of had picked this ahead of time. This is a Contech. This is a Wisconsin company, I believe, out of Madison. I think one of the biggest advantages, not only the structure, but the manufacturer, the vendor, also provides an engineering plan, which will save the town probably in the neighborhood of $20,000 if we would have went with a different structure. It would have been a separate entity to come up with an engineering plan for a structure. If we bought this structure from this vendor, the engineering plan came with on-site assistance from their staff. So the town was comfortable with this vendor, and we were able to work with them to complete the project. So we started the project in 2020? I think it was 2020. And so here's the old structure. If you remember that very initial picture with that cobblestone type front, this are those 4 culverts. So what they have to do is they have to divert the stream to work in the dry. So they drove sheet piling in upstream and then dug a bypass channel around the project site, and the stream flowing this way. So that's kind of what this looks like. Just another picture if you're looking downstream. So the bypass channel is over here. You can see the culverts. This is sheet piling here, just driven into the ground. And they put down a cloth barrier and stone. And again, this is just a downstream side. And so this is what was left of the crossing in the road. So this was August 3rd and 4th. And I think it's important to pay attention to these dates as they go, because things happen pretty quick. And I would generally go out there at the end of the day once the crew was done to take pictures. So here we have, these are the old structures on August 5th and 7th where they ripped the old culverts out. And then here you can see all these pipes in the ground. Okay. Essentially what they are is sand points hooked to a great big pump that's sucking water out of the ground. And this is kind of the same thing that they would use if they were putting in like city sewers or whatnot, so they could excavate and put in the pipes and whatnot. So you see these around where the whole new structure is going to go in. So this thing, first thing they would do before they leave at night was fill it up with fuel. It'd be the first thing they did when they came in the morning was fill it back up with fuel, because this thing ran the whole time the project was going on. So again, here's the stream coming around the project site. So this particular, these are all made to spec, and I just took pictures of these off the structures as they were delivered. These are the concrete precast footers for this crossing, and again, they're built and manufactured specifically for this project at this location. And so these are delivered to the site. And so here we are, August 8th through the 10th was the installation of these. And I think it's key to remember these things, and I'm going to back up just one slide here. Just to get an idea, these are about 3.5 feet tall, so about 42 inches tall, so about your hip if you're average height. That's about how high these are. And two of these together would be 20 feet across. Actually, this is probably 12 feet here, and this is probably 10 because two of them fit together. So the bottom of these sits 11 feet below road grade. So that's kind of where we're at. And you can see, even with the pumps going here to de-water the site, you're still seeing a little bit of seepage down in the bottom of these footers here. And I'm just standing on top of a backhoe looking north across where the stream would be as these are installed. Again, here's your bypass channel, and here's going to be the new crossing. This is where the creek is going to come through. Make sure I didn't double click myself through here. Nope. Okay. So here we are, August 11th. This is the day, right? We're going to start placing these. You can tell just by the shadow line, I'm facing north. We're getting started. It's probably about 8:30 in the morning. They started to lift and swing this over. Well, what happened is the foot on the crane, the road wouldn't support it, because this section right here of the end cap, give you an idea, it's 49,000 pounds. So just shy of 25 tons. And as he went to reach out to swing that through, the crane couldn't hold it. So he had to set it down. And these over here are only 20 tons. So he started placing those, and they called in reinforcements and showed out with another crane. So he came in from the other direction, and they were able to use two cranes to lift these in place. And believe me, they worked quick, because these cranes run about $1,500 an hour. So they were moving pretty quick to get these in, so these cranes could get off the job site. So here we are, about midday. You can judge from the shadows. We were getting this last section put in. Then essentially what we're doing is sealing the joints. Essentially it's a rubberized caulk and they prime and put a rubberized adhesive to keep any filtration of water and sediment between the joints here. And it does allow a little bit of expansion and contraction as well, because these things will contract and expand with changes in temperature. And they set the wing walls in the afternoon, so there's concrete footers that went in at the same time here. So we're putting the wing walls in, and this is pretty exact. I mean, because everything is hard bolted together. So, and these are just what we call a dead man here. This is like an earth anchor that helps maintain the integrity and position of the wing walls. And here we are, by early afternoon, we're pouring concrete. So yeah, and again, the whole time have to be careful around all of our pumps, because you still have to keep this site dewatered as this is going in. So that was a busy day. It was about a 12-hour day. to get all this done. So here we are, the morning of the 12th, concrete set. Matt had to write his name in there, I guess, for nobody to ever see again. But anyway, putting in the drainage around the structure to flow around, so anything that filters through has an exit point, and start backfilling. And here we are. Well, here I came back out on the evening of the 13th with anticipation, and I remember this day because it was the day my wife got her tonsils out, and I felt horrible. We got home from the hospital, and I got her all tucked away and situated, and I said, honey, I'll be right back. I got to go do something for work. Well, I got out there, and I couldn't believe it how much they got done that day. So here we are. You know, they've got the gravel over the top, everything backfilled. And I think one of the things I really want to point out here is, you know, when we armored this bank, we had to armor it not only here, but here, but it was really the height of this that we were most concerned about, because if you remember when I was talking about, you know, floodplain connectivity during a high discharge event, the last thing we wanted to do is create a wall for the water to come through the culvert, and then what happened is ricochet back. Then you would have compromised the road itself. We wanted to allow the water as it came through to be able to flow into the floodplain as well. We didn't want to constrict it too much, right? It's got to have room to go, because you saw how much water was crossing the road way up here. So this was key to keep this downstream bank, establish a solid bank, but keep it at an elevation that was low enough that during high water events, the water would be free to go through. And so here we are again on the 14th, doing the finishing touches, seeding, mulching, putting in the stream or road crossing signs, and came back a month later in October, and this is what it looked like. This is on the downstream, or this is on the upstream side looking down, and this is on the downstream side looking upstream. So kind of a finished site. So after the project was done, you know, Chris Collier came out and did another stream profile for us, because we know before and after, right? You can see not only does it fit the natural stream corridor, you can see this is the before, how the stream was really trying to push north, and it just, it was really constricted. Here we were able to move the whole structure to better fit the stream profile, but we also pitched it, you know, to follow the stream corridor itself. Town was a little concerned. They didn't really like it, but I think once they saw the finished product, and obviously by tilting it that 8 or 10 degrees, we had to have an extra section bridge too. We didn't put guardrails on it because of the agricultural traffic and whatnot. We wanted to make sure that, you know, anything that wanted to go through there could not be restricted. So I think having that extra section was really a good thing. So again, part of the grant deliverables was a construction completion report, which I completed in October, the year the project was done. I did make a fact sheet for this. I highlight this in reports, and obviously I'm obligated to, you know, continue to talk about this project as much as I can. And it's really become a flagship project for our department and program for the last few years. And a lot of different programs have made several site visits, you know, to use this as a teaching tool. So I'm really happy that it turned out well. You know, I did a site visit in May of 2022. There was a big rain event there was some flooding in Suring and some other places where, you know, I think they got something like 5 or 6 inches of rain overnight. And I remember coming into the office and I told my boss, I'm like, I got to run out there and see if they close the road. I got to see how this structure is doing. And, you know, it's doing it. Hey, I got down there. The road wasn't closed. You could see there's still a little bit of freeboard. Obviously, it was a lot of water, right? And it was doing exactly what we wanted. It was able to, you know, go over that far bank and connect that floodplain, and we didn't compromise the road. So, I mean, overall, it's functioning as intended. And I think if it was able to handle that rain event, then I think we're going to be good. And I know the town was really pleased as well. So, some of the other things that we did while we were out there too, again, this is the crossing. You know, the old crossing, there was parking for folks right there. It was enough for one person to get off and park there, maybe two if they parked well. But Green Bay Trout Unlimited gave us $5,000 more to incorporate a parking at this site. So this is what we were able to do, because this was the year after the project. They were clearing the shoulders a little bit, but they hadn't paved yet. So I worked with a local contractor to do this little bump out on the southwest corner of the crossing to create a parking spot off the road for folks. and I worked with our staff to make sure the appropriate permits and everything were done. So we incorporated that, but then also just downstream, you can see, remember I told you this was a habitat project where we had a bunch of bank covers? Well, during our 2009 renovation, we cut a trail in with our heavy equipment so we could get in there. So what we did here off the road is created a pad. And then Jonathan Piatsko, he's our habitat specialist. What we did is we put in some planks because it's kind of swampy. It's cedar swamp in areas. We put it in planks in a nice walking trail, or at least we put the planks where it was wet. So people can walk now from here all the way back down, and there's a couple of low spots where we put planks and fish along those bank covers all the way back up to the road. Turn around and walk back, that's fine, or walk the road back to your vehicle. But we've got a couple nice parking spots there. But even more, I guess I cut out the other one. I'm sorry. But there's another parking area downstream of probably about a half a mile where we've cut it to the stream is probably a half a mile from the parking lot. We only have like a 66-foot wide strip through there. So Jonathan has created a better path to help folks visiting the property navigate back to the stream. So we've done a lot of work in that particular area and brushing up and downstream of there. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the audience. If they've got some questions, doesn't have to necessarily have to be about what we talked about. If you've got another stream, I have access to my computer here. I can always pull things up and, answer any questions that folks might have.
Hey, Chip, that was awesome. I'll start by saying that. Thanks for coming on. I know it was short notice. We had potentially another speaker who had something come up and wasn't able to be with us tonight. So I appreciate you filling in. It's really cool to see. It's not glamorous work, right? The road stream crossings, but we hear so much about it. Just the work that Laura started, and now Chris Collier and his crew is continuing on in northern Wisconsin, and that connectivity is so important to these trout populations. And I think as things like climate change and we continue to put more stressors with land use on the ground to these populations, like this connectivity issues is probably one of the best things that we can do to give those populations a chance to thrive. So
well, and I think that's where I'd really like to take this time to just mention this to the audience too. If and when you're out fishing and you see these things, I guarantee you everybody's got a phone. And the nice thing about phones now is they all have cameras. And even if you question, is it a problem crossing? Take pictures upstream, downstream, and forward those to your local biologist, because we depend on our stakeholders and our anglers to help us, right? You have to kind of report these things because we may not get there, right? Or we may not know it exists if there is in fact a problem. So I think, you guys are our eyes too, and I think if you see a culvert on a stream, it could be a bridge, it could be a double culvert, if it just looks off, or you can tell obviously if the downstream side is perched, those are things we want to know. Now, whether we can address it immediately, here's a problem that we knew we had, and it still took 2 years, which is actually pretty good when you think about it, to address it. But this was in addition to all the other survey work and other responsibilities I was performing as part of my job too. So this was an add-on, and I think that's why my boss at the time cautioned me. He said, "Move forward with caution. This is going to be a lot of work," which was fine. But I think for me, it was the larger philosophy that this is our property, right? We hold this in trust. And I think, again, if we want to send this message to our partners, then we should be leading by example. And I think that's really why I put as much into it as I did, because I felt it was that important. Here's a fishery area, right? Here's a problem crossing. If you want to do it, this is what you should do. Was it expensive? Yeah, it was. Can we do every crossing to that degree? No, we can't. But it was just, I obviously there was a little bit more passion there with this one for me, and I'm glad it worked out. And I had great partners. I mean, whether it was the town, whether it was the coastal management program, whether it was Contact, the manufacturer, they were great to work with. I mean, it was about as smooth. And the contractor was local contractor out of Crivets, Richland and Company. They did great. So, it was a good project.
Yeah, and I'll give a shout out to our Green Bay Trout Unlimited chapter as well. It's great to see a local chapter like that looking outside of their territory and helping out in some of these more rural areas. So,
Oh yeah, they're a very active chapter, whether it be, from a financial standpoint or whether it be for our Trout Unlimited work days up here in the Northeast. We sponsor a work day every month throughout the Northeast, well, and with the Forest Service. So they're a very active group. They come and obviously, to show my appreciation, I went down in February. I think it was February of last year or maybe the year before, and gave them the same talk and showed them the project, just as you guys got to see tonight too. So yeah, they were a big part of that. And I think with their donation, it allowed the town to do some of the preliminary soil sampling and whatnot that was required for Contact to actually do the engineering as we waited for the grants to be approved. So you say, "Oh, it was $5,000," but that $5,000 was key because we could do a lot of the preliminary work prior to
yeah,
being awarded the grant. So when we did get the grants, we were, you know, everything was ready to go, so to speak. So you think, well, $5,000, what's that really going to do? Well, in this case, it did a lot. Um, it allowed the
yeah,
town to move forward without setting back their limited budget, right? So,
sure. That's perfect. That's great. And it's awesome to hear them like step up at the angler access and the parking areas too. I think that's another area where we as Trout Unlimited, another opportunity where we could kind of pitch in and just help make that angler experience out on the streams a little bit better. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree. And then that's another thing too, it doesn't just have to be road stream crossings. If there's a place that you feel like needs to be brushed, or there's log jams, or there's, willows that were planted 60 years ago, there's projects that we're working all over. I mean, if you have suggestions and feedback, whether we can address it immediately or at all, I think we're still receptive to that. And I think we want that feedback and that interaction with our anglers, or whether it be Trout Unlimited or other stakeholder groups. If you don't speak up, we don't know, right? I mean, so it's that whole see something, say something thing, only with trout and trout habitat. So
absolutely. Yeah. So you kind of mentioned your work plan a little bit, and I'm going to kind of go back to something that you talked about in the beginning, the trout management plan. And
mhm.
Tom was on, and he asked about if you could just maybe expand a little bit on how you use the trout management plan to inform your current work and plans for future work.
Well, my streams are kind of on a rotation, and I mean, when I have high priority projects, and I'm going to be doing my last year of sampling on my south branch of the Pemmican. I've been working on this project now going on 12 years. I really need to tie that up. Now, I think with the change in stocking guidance, I've got some stocking quotas that, according to the new guidance, I really need to do some supporting work to justify either continuing that, or is the data going to suggest that I shouldn't be doing that? So I've got to change some things up. So I want to say that, yes, our trout management plan does guide that work, but also our changes in policy and guidance also guide our our annual work as it comes to trout stream sampling. And when we realigned, we don't call it reorganization anymore, we call it realignment. When the trout habitat specialist, and now he's got a full-time technician, they do a lot of the trout habitat work. Now, do we work in conjunction with one another? Yes. I say, well, I'd like to do a project on this stream, but I don't know exactly what that looks like. What do you suggest? Those are things that we're working on together. So I think these are just some broad goals, but I think our specific objectives are going to be, again, they're going to be specific to our needs locally. So, and I think, when you look at like our goal number 3, collect, develop, and use the best science to guide our trout management decisions, I think that's what we're doing. And we're really taking that hard look at the social component, right? The people component, by getting out there that opening weekend or a couple of days and utilizing those different tools to make decisions. If we're stocking a couple thousand fish and we put a camera up and nobody's showing up for opening day, is that something that we need to do? And that's not a rhetorical question, but it kind of is. But you need to think about it a little bit more critically. And especially in today's day and age, I mean, everything costs more. It doesn't matter whether you're raising fish, where you're hauling fish. And again, if we're going to put those products out there for our public, we're going to put them where they're best utilized, right? Because if you're going to stock fish and you're not considering the available habitat and use, it's kind of counterproductive. right? I mean, so we're really taking a critical look at that. And it's like, I always question when I moved here, if 70% of my trout water is class one, why am I stocking 50,000 fish a year? I'm in a trout rich area. Why is there such this big? And I was asking this question every year. Well, this is kind of what we've always done. Well, that doesn't mean this is what we should always do, And so I think you kind of deal with those issues on a case by case, which is what kind of happened with the South Branch of the Pemmican. We were working with an external partner was raising these fish, and it was their expectation that we would stock them locally, and we were able to accommodate that for decades. But then here comes Chip, I guess. No, but I'm looking at it a little bit more critically. I'm saying, well, this is class one. What are we doing? Well, then the new guidance gave me a firm foundation to say, well, now we can't do it based on our new policy, but let's learn from that. And is this stream classified appropriately? So I think, there's a lot of moving parts, and then it's the time, right? I mean, here's a project that I've been working on for, again, almost 12 years to finally come to a resolution. To realize that we really didn't need to stock this, and we'll see what the 2024 data says. But I don't know if that really answers your question. But we do kind of use this as a guide. But then again, our local goals and objectives, while they will adhere to the mission of the plan, and the plan is obviously a fluid document, but we're going to have case by case, things that we have to deal with locally. So
yeah. It's site specific, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was happy to see you mention the potential change from like yellow to green.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw. I'm not sure if I don't know if the spring hearings has formally put out the questionnaire, but I know the DNR pitched it to the Natural Resources Board as one of the questions on there that
Mm-hmm.
folks are going to get to weigh in on this April, is whether or not we get rid of the yellow category altogether and just go to a straight a green as like the base regulation statewide, which would be 5 bag, 5 fish total, no size limit on
Mm-hmm.
it. So,
Well,
but
and the
yeah,
daily limit's always been 5. The problem for an angler is if you're fishing a stream and you got three fish in your possession, and you didn't go home first, and you're coming back to your truck and you've got 2 trout, right, from that particular stream. How do you prove that you didn't make a trip to your truck before you were checked, right? Because technically the daily limit is 5 fish, right? But
sure.
you're only allowed 3 from one particular stream. So, there's the rub, and I always defer to law enforcement because I'm not the guy writing the ticket.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so I encourage you to contact your local warden, and how would he suggest that you handle that? Because that is one of the complaints I used to get was like, well, I'm driving an hour up into the county. That's not very productive for me to drive that far to keep 3 fish. And so we'd have that same dialogue, say, well, technically you're allowed to have 5. And now how you're going to address that, I would call so-and-so or so-and-so and get some advice from them. But again, after, 13, 14 years of sampling these streams, I'm very confident that harvest is not going to impact overall numbers.
Yeah, it's good to hear. So,
yeah.
Definitely, I just wanted to make people aware of that it'll be a question that's coming up in the spring hearings.
Yes.
I think it's an advisory question, so I think it sounded like the department just kind of wanted to get public opinion and see where folks are at with that. So,
but I've already supported that too. I've already said, yeah, I'd be happy to go to green, and I talked to my counterpart in Florence, and then Tammy, who's in my office that manages some of the the southern Oconto County streams too. And I'm like, I'm good with it if they want to go to green. And she said, yeah, me too. And I think Greg up north was on board. So, and again, I don't regret taking a more conservative approach 5 or 6 years ago. But now that they brought it to the forefront, and I've already made that. I mean, if you look at the slide that's up on the screen, I've already been changing a few streams, but those are streams where I'm stocking several thousand fish as well. Right.
Yeah.
And again, if I'm stocking fish in a stream, I want people to take them. If they're going there to fish opening weekend or whatever, well, then come get your 5, right? And come back the next day too. So that was kind of my motivation for getting those changed, because it was product oriented. Here, we're stocking these. Why should I limit you when I'm telling you this is where I'm putting them? So it was kind of being a little bit more realistic. So
there was something I had a question about, and you didn't touch on it at all, so I was hoping maybe you could. I know, like recently, the department came out with the Brook Trout Reserve program. I was just curious, are there any like reserve areas in your area in like Marinette, Oconto County? Are you part of that?
Yeah, I do have a lot of the brook trout reserves, and they have impacted how I'm approaching management in some of my streams. Um, I'm probably not as well prepared to talk about that. I can give you a couple examples. Am I involved? Yes. Do I have brook trout reserves here? Yes, I do. Some
Okay.
are of higher quality than others. Um, but I'm going to use this middle inlet system that comes down in Lake Nockabee as an example. Middle inlet is an area that we stock trout for years, and brown trout. And I'm going to ask you to excuse me just for 1 second. Okay.
Sure. Sure. No problem. Well, it's funny. Chip mentioned Middle Inlet going into Lake Nockabee. My
Got to go to the bathroom.
shouldn't be spot burning, but
Should be over. It's 10 o'clock.
but I think Chip's got some. He's got young kids at home, and his wife
I'm
is
back.
out at a
I'm
meeting.
back.
So.
They just needed a kiss before bed. They yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, like I say, it's my little one. He's 5 tomorrow. He's missing dad already. So
It's all good. So
so
good to
no,
know
with the brook trout reserves. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's good to know that we've got some areas set aside in that part of the state. I know the water quality up there is really good, and so it's good to hear that there's a couple of reserve areas where we think those populations are gonna be sustainable over time. So somebody had a fun question here. Which stream has the biggest trout in it? And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I mean, you survey these streams like all the time. Can you give it? Well, maybe you already did. I guess you talked about that.
I did. And hold on just a second. I'm going to answer that question, but I'm just going to be 1 second. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. So, obviously the Beaver Creek, Chip mentioned that earlier. That when you looked at, I don't know how many people caught that, but the percentile, you look at the big brown trout in there, and it was in like the 99th percentile, and so that's basically saying like out of all the streams in the state, like this is one of the highest, population densities of large trout, for that. So if you get a chance to look at some of these stocking or the survey reports, keep an eye on that percentile number, because that can be certainly a cue for anglers if you're looking for big fish or fish in like specific size ranges or something like that. Or even if you're looking for fish maybe to harvest or something, you want a nice a bunch of like 10, 11, 12 inches. You can look at that percentile for that size fish, and those survey reports that the DNR does is, yeah, I think you got one right there, Chip, right?
Yeah, and like I say, so you say which stream has the biggest trout? I mean, this fellow on the right's the guy that called me and said, "Hey, I really would like to lay into a big brown." And I said, "Well, this is where I would get in the stream, and I would walk that direction and cover as much water as you can." And like I say, 3 days later, he sends me that picture of that 23-inch brown. And of course, I asked him. I was like, "Did you keep it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, good for you." I mean, that's probably what's that fish got? Another year, 2 tops. And I'm not an anti-harvest. I mean, if you go fishing and you want to keep fish, then great. And if there's not fish there to catch, then I'm not doing my job, right? I kind of think fish are a renewable resource, right? Harvest on some of these fish isn't a bad thing. Yep. It's really not. So, and I get it. And there's people who will never keep a fish, and that's cool too. I mean, I'll cater to either group. I just doesn't, do I keep every fish I catch? No. Do I keep a fish from time to time? Absolutely. Yeah. But I think and just to go back, and I overheard you talking. Sorry, they're like I say, my boys. Where my wife, I'm raising 2, my wife's raising 3. So I think, so
good for her.
Well, yeah, when we talk about percentiles, though, for my particular area, I do have to stress it's to this northern forest, lakes and forest ecoregion. These percentiles are not to the state.
Oh, they're not statewide. Okay.
No, they're just to this area in green. Okay. And And that's because of things like habitat types, land use, and you know, those other different metrics, right? I don't comparing abundance and size structure from northeast Wisconsin to the driftless area wouldn't be apples to apples. And I think
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for correcting me on that.
that's no, and that's okay. Yeah. So that's really what I wanted to mention there. But all these fish are from the North Branch of the Beaver. This was actually, you know, I got Laura McFarland out there when we did that initial stream profile for this project. It was like, you know, I don't think you can really appreciate or understand what I'm trying to do. So I took our tote barge out there and I said, here. So I got some of the partners and I put waders on them. I'm like, let's put some juice in the water, and I want you guys to see, because these bank covers, these big browns just hide in there. I mean, they're not going anywhere. And it's, you know, and a deep hole in this particular stream is gonna, well, there are some deeper holes that will go over your waist, but most of the time it's 3 to 4 feet is a nice pool. And around some of these bank covers, we have several of those holes in that 1,200-foot stretch. But, you know, brown trout don't get to be that size by being vulnerable either, right? But no, this picture of me down in the middle there, that's a 16-inch brook trout that we got when we were doing it. And right away, you know, and when they were seeing big, you know, tubs full of big brown trout, and we didn't shock that far. We only shocked a couple 100 yards. And they're like, holy moly. And I'm like, I said, and I was kind of joking with them. I said, I think these trout all hang up here because they're afraid to go through that one pipe, right? They can't really get through there, right? Which they can, right? But at the same time, and there's been a ton of work done on this stream over the years by other staff, movement studies where they would go out and track fish manually. And again, this is property that we've acquired to protect and enhance. You know, so it's publicly owned. And Marinette County, there really is no shortage of public land. When you get up into I'm going to switch to another map, but when you get up into the northwest part of the county, up in this area, this is all county forest. There's like 400 and some thousand acres up here that, you know, it's all public property. And you hear a lot about the stream bank easement program and access, which are good programs. But access isn't an issue for me because then you're over in Oconto County, which is all national forest, right? So I don't have an access issue. Now I have some streams that do have limited access, you know, primarily at a road or stream crossing. But, you know, we have very good, you know, public ownership in Marinette County, which they should. It's the second or third largest county in the state. So,
sure.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate there that, you know, we can implement all the best management practices through county forestry. We're going to revisit some of those to evaluate whether those are adequate or not. So it's
good.
Great area.
Well, we're at like 10 after 9, and there are a bunch of questions here still.
And I'm okay with that. It's up to you and your audience. If people want to drop off like flies, I get it. I appreciate you coming out. If you had questions, I'm going to put my contact information back on the screen. You know, maybe inevitably it was like an exam, right? I always remember the answer after I turned my test in. So maybe you'll think of a question later tonight or tomorrow. You know, there's my email address. You can call, leave me a message. I can call you back. That phone's on that number's to my desk phone in the office.
Can we roll through a few more questions? Like
absolutely. I'm happy to do that for sure.
David had a question about the food chain for brook trout once they get over like 12 inches, or, you know, you show a picture of like 16-inch brook trout, like from a fisheries biologist perspective, like what are those fish eating, or what do we need in the streams to keep making those fish?
Well, I think too, you know, they're trout, right? I mean, and I think seasonally, different food items are going to be more abundant than others, right? So that's where, you know, knowing what's available. And a lot of these cold water streams, species diversity in terms of fish, they're not very diverse. You know, you're talking 6, maybe 7 species of fish. When you start to pick up other cyprinids and minnow species is when the streams start to get warmer. You start to get into your class 2, class 3. But in your class 1 streams that are really, really cold, you're going to see brook and brown trout or just brook trout. You're going to see sculpins and a few species of dace. That's about it. So to say that they turn piscivorous or just to prey solely on fish, no, probably not. The crayfish, and obviously, you know, whatever hatches might be going on, terrestrial bugs that fall in the water during, you know, on a windy day, because you have so much canopy cover on a lot of these small streams, right? So, there's a lot of stone and caddis flies up in these streams as well. So, I mean, I don't think the menu is any different than anywhere else. But what you aren't going to see is the overall standing crop of fish, in our streams that you would compared to the driftless area, just due to soil types and land use and whatnot. The soils in the water just doesn't have the overall productivity. Our waters are a little bit more stained, so they're just not as productive. Even though some of them are very, very cold. But then you have to look at the geology as it runs through our county too, right? We have streams that are very flat, then they have these heavy gradients, and then they come down and they're flat again. And a lot of our streams have a lot of sand and sediment too. So
Okay. Yeah, here's another question. Let's move on. Bob was asking, does the local TU chapter ever get involved with sampling or like fin clipping? Or is that primarily just the biologists and the technicians doing that type of
no,
work?
actually, this picture right here, this is Doug Erdman. I think he's since moved over into the central part of the state.
Yep.
But I had them and a local sports writer. And a matter of fact, this is Kyle. He's on the habitat crew out of the Wild Rose. And I'm like, you guys do so much habitat work. Do you ever really get to see the fruits of your labor? So no, at least once or twice a year, I get the habitat guys out, to kind of change a pace for them, right? You guys are out slinging chainsaws and heavy equipment. Why don't you come see what's actually in the stream? So they always get a kick out of that. But then, yeah, I get the TU guys out there,
Awesome.
I mean, they have to ask. And there's we have to do a little short training and talk about safety and electricity and what it means. And then they got to sign a volunteer form that says, if anything were to happen, it kind of alleviates the department any liability. But we do it regularly. And if you live in an area and you want to do that, contact your local biologist.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rick just had a comment. Love sharing the pics with my son, who's a civil engineer drainage specialist.
Probably
So
45,
that's
maybe.
pretty cool.
Maybe.
Looks like Michael had a question here. It said after they set the bridge in, how did they remove the dirt under the arch? And did they lay gravel on the bottom under the bridge?
No, what they did scrape a little bit out of that, but based on the pre-project elevations, they scraped it down to about what the original stream bottom would have been. So they kind of graded it because we had shot elevations. So before they put the sections on the footers, they graded it down to what our bottom elevations were prior to the project. Now, did some of that loose soil migrate downstream? Well, yes, it did. But as we tried to keep as much of it out of there as we could, but there was going to be some, and we knew that, right? And we did pre and post habitat evaluations up and downstream to monitor those changes. So,
real quick again, who's the contractor that did the work?
Oh, that was Reisner, or not Reisner. I'm sorry, Richland out of Crivets won that bid. The town put it out to bid, and Richland got the.
Where did you get Jack's update at?
Okay, sounds good.
That's just talk. Where is
the question?
Somebody's not muted.
Where?
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's a small talk. What you gave me. Where is Project 3 located? You say Hudson, blah blah blah. What are?
So Henry had a question. He was asking, what is the average percentage of holdover of stockfish to the next year's shocking survey? Or in other words, does stocking create mainly a put and take fishery? Or are you seeing these stocked fish? Are they showing up in the surveys year after year after year?
No, they're not. I'm not. And that, especially with the stocking evaluation, most of the fish that we're stocking are an 8-inch average. And of course we say average, right? So if I were to I'm going to go to the data that I have here. We had some smaller fish that were fin clipped, right? So are we seeing a lot of holdovers? Probably not. Why? I don't know. Again, I really don't understand the mechanism. Where are these fish going? I mean, you're talking over a 3-year period, we collected 400 out of 15,000. I can't imagine in Pembine on this particular stream that harvest was that high. I just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So that begs to the question then, well, what's happening to them? Well, I don't know.
Mhm.
I would love to think that they were being harvested, but
Yeah.
I
You're probably
and I
getting
think
some.
that was and that was my mistake here. What I should have done, excuse me, I only clipped fish in the years we were sampling. I should have, as an afterthought, I should have continued to clip fish even in the years we weren't sampling, because there's no way to know if these fish here were fish in a non-sampling year, right? There's no
Gotcha.
way to really
Oh,
know.
no.
But by
Sure.
picking a 5-year window not to stock fish, so we didn't stock fish in 19, 20, or 21. I picked a 5-year window because of the life history of brook trout. They're relatively short-lived, right? So any fish that were stocked in 2018 probably won't be there in 2024,
Yeah.
right?
No, that
They
makes
just
sense.
probably won't. So then I'm probably going to have a true representation this year of what the wild population looks like. Now, all things remaining the same over a decade, well, no, water levels are going to be lower this year. And what's that going to do? How's that going to impact our results? Well, you can't account for every variable, but we'll at least put in the same effort at the same number of sites and see what we come up with, right?
Sure.
But
Absolutely.
all in all, I think the results are promising, and it just kind of says, hey, and I'll be honest too, my counterpart that I work with, he's like, well, you know what? Maybe we're seeing more fish in 21 because people aren't fishing here anymore because we don't stock fish. And that's a real possibility,
Yeah.
I don't know, but
Yep. Yeah, you can't say for certain, right?
what they're not targeting is 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6-inch fish. And so that was my counter argument to him. I'm like, yeah, but look at all these, and these fish now aren't competing with this big slug of fish that we put in for the same food and space.
Sure.
So were we suppressing these couple early year classes by stocking bigger fish? Were they succumbing to predation from these stocked fish? Whereas now we're not because any population of living things is going to have this natural bell curve, right? As you get older, there are fewer of you. Well, when you all of a sudden inflate that older portion of the population, something's got to give. And was this what was giving these 2 early year classes because we put those in? I don't know, but hypothetically that makes sense. But again, I don't want to hang my hat on one data point. I want to repeat that and see if this is holding true, and then what's really happening up here. Are we still be able to maintain good number? I mean, look at the number of 8-inch fish. We're talking probably 80. So we're talking almost 10%, 9%. So that's pretty good for a self-sustaining population. Yeah. So
can we switch gears real quick and talk about smallmouth? Because I know a lot of us are TU members, like we have an affinity for the Menominee River and the warm water fishing. So what's the status of the smallmouth fishing? Is Tom's question. Is it declining? Is it getting better? Is it staying the same?
Well, I think it depends on how you approach it, right? I mean, how do you fish? I mean, if you're going to go in and fish the same pool, in the same sort of habitat, and I think it's going to depend on the time of year. I think overall numbers and the status are probably status quo. There's nothing that would lead me to believe that it's declining. I think it's going to continue to be what it is. The habitat is more than conducive to successful spawning, reproduction and recruitment there. And there's just so much inaccessible habitat to people, right? I mean, it's a pretty rugged, remote resource. I'm sure there's sections that get pounded harder than others. Obviously, there's a lot of, guided trips that take place up and down the, this is Sturgeon Falls right here. This is a popular stretch. And then from here to here, you can't really go because there's Pemmican Falls here. You can pull it in below Pemmican Falls and come down into Chalk Hill, or you can put in below White Rapids, which comes all the way down here to Grand Rapids. And then once you're below Grand Rapids, then you have Twin Island, which is a tough section to get through. And then by then you're down into Marinette, which is a little bit more impounded. All these sections have good smallmouth. So yeah,
But no reason to worry. The smallmouth aren't going anywhere, right?
No, but I think when it comes to management of that, we always have to consult with our counterparts, Michigan DNR. We like to keep our regulations as congruent as possible, so anytime we make a change or they want to make a change, we have to be on the same page. So that's why you don't see as many regulatory changes on the boundary waters, because it's a more complicated process.
Sure. All right, let's do one more. Somebody a question about beaver dams and the trout streams in your area. How do you approach it? Like I mean, your area is so big, you can't go they have a spot on the landscape, right? At what point do you determine, okay, this is a problem in this stream, we need to go in and take some of those animals out, versus like, okay, there's some activity here, but it's not really, we don't think it's going to affect anything. Like, how do you approach those scenarios?
Well, I think twofold. I mean, one, I look at the history of beaver management. We can go up in here to the north and the south branch of the Pemmican, where they first went in there back in the 80s and took out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dams. And I really highlighted that a lot more during my first talk when I spoke specifically about beaver management. And then they did follow-up work, 10 years later, in terms of mark recapture of fish and angler creel surveys. And so I think really my philosophy on those is we already have such a big investment that I think we'd be foolish to not continue to follow through, right? I think that there's other staff that have really put a lot into it. We've learned a lot. And so for those two particular streams, and one's already class 2, so you have marginal habitat anyway. So if we let beavers recolonize, and it's already temperature challenged, it probably would be class 3 if we didn't take care of it, right? And it's a sizable stream. So I think that's one thing. And those two streams specifically kind of fall under that same umbrella. And I'm going to back up just to provide a little bit of background. We were the last fish team in the state that did our own beaver control in-house. So we had a trout habitat technician, we had an LTE trapper, we did our fall flights, but we had more of a shotgun approach. We'd say, we might do some beaver management here and over here and over here and over here. Whereas USDA or APHIS, their management philosophy is to maintain free-flowing streams. So what they're going to do is, if you have a stream on their working list, they're going to monitor it for beaver activity continuously, right? Whether it's, they're going to walk those streams and monitor on an annual basis for beaver activity. They're going to actively manage it. Well, we didn't do that. We might be in a stream and take care of a beaver dam in a colony, and then until we observe activity, we may not come back for 10 years or at all. So essentially what I did is I went through all the data we had, put it in a set spreadsheet, hit click sort, and wherever we had the most activity or had the most success with beaver management, when that person retired and we turned over beaver management on our team over to USDA, I kind of went where we had the most activity in terms of beavers and dams and added those to our working list. And then obviously I looked at the quality class 1, class 2, class 3, and tried to come up with a list of streams that I also adhered to the beaver management plan. I'm only allowed to manage so many miles of stream under that plan, but up here I'm never going to hit that. One, I don't have the money to pay for that much beaver management either. Yeah. So that was kind of my approach is, well, what's the quality of the fishery? What's the history of beaver management here, right? And those were kind of my two criteria, and we're under the task now to take a more critical look at not only where we're doing beaver control, but why are we doing it? And that's essentially what I'm going to do again. I'm going to take the results from USDA and I'm going to sort them out and where they had the most success or the most activity, and how does that overlay with our fisheries data, and try and make some better decisions in that regard. So, but price per mile, I think you get the best bang for your buck. And I think that's been proven time and time again when you're looking at maintaining, the integrity of trout stream habitat, beaver management is money well spent.
Sure. So, yeah. But good stuff. And I know Matt Mitro in the department is working on some pretty interesting beaver studies right now too. So it'll be interesting to see when he's got his data kind of collected, and if he's able to draw some conclusions from that.
Yeah.
It'll be kind of interesting to see how that all plays out. But
For sure.
I just want to, I know it's late, you got young kids, and just
Oh,
really
they're in
wanna
bed now.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, Chip, thanks for taking your time tonight. Somebody had a question as to whether or not this would be posted online, and yes, absolutely. Chip said we could record it. We're recording this. I'll get it up on our YouTube channel in the next day or so. And then just thanks again, Chip. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing the knowledge of the Northeast with us.
And no problem. I just put my contact information and put that plug out there one more time for folks. I mean, I know it's recorded, but if you do have a question or a comment, like I say, feel free to give me a call or send me an email if you didn't get a chance to ask a question tonight. Again, I'd be happy to talk to you or answer your questions.
That sounds great. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate you sticking with us here tonight, and have a good night, and we will see you next month if we don't see you on the water before then. All right, take care, everybody.